Jack Smith's Deposition, Part 8. Steve Bannon, Sidney Powell, and Phone Records. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe, and let's dive into Jack Smith's deposition. What I'm doing right now is I will be reading you excerpts from Jack Smith's deposition about his case against Donald Trump regarding January 6, 2021, and the fake elector scheme with the intention of upending our constitutional order. And the reason why I'm doing it is because while Donald Trump has pardoned over 1,500 people who participated in the Capitol riots on January 6th, and they will be walking the streets freely and going to Washington on January 6th, I want the rest of us to remember that Donald Trump was responsible for January 6th, and all these people are trying to rewrite the truth, and we the people, a vast majority of us, simply will not let that happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the questions and then Smith's answers. Did you interview Mark Meadows? So, by the way, some of the excerpts may be repetitive because Jack Smith was being peppered with questions from all different sides all at once. So it skips around topics, but there are general themes, and that's what I put in the heading. Did you interview Mark Meadows? Smith, we did. We were unable to talk to Mark Meadows. Were you able to find out the communication that was between Mark Meadows and Mr. Bannon and potentially Mr. Stone on the evening of January 5th at the so-called war room at the hotel? Smith, I don't recall that as I sit here right now. I know Mr. Meadows spoke to a number of people who were either involved in or adjacent to this conspiracy. As I sit here now, I don't recall that specific evidence. I think he was in touch with Bannon, but I don't recall specifically the answer to that question. Question, Mr. Bannon made an extraordinary video basically predicting the events of January 6th on the day before. Were you able to discover, either by interviewing Mr. Bannon or those who had knowledge of what he was doing, how he was aware of the riot before it happened? Smith, we did not interview Mr. Bannon. I believe that that particular statement you're talking about would have been part of our proof, and my recollection is that we had evidence that would indicate for some point, not immediately after the election, but shortly thereafter, sometime, it might have been closer to the December period, that Bannon, who had been out of touch with President Trump for some time period, got back in more regular touch with him sometime. We had a text thread between Bannon and Epstein, Boris Epstein, that went through a lot of this period. I believe it was the evening of January 6th, right around the time the senators' calls were occurring at the direction of the president. There was an exchange between those two wherein Epstein asked Bannon, are you in touch with him? And the answer was affirmative, something to the effect of, he's still on fire. Question. There was a December 18th meeting. Do you remember a December 18th meeting at the White House right before President Trump issued the "will be wild" tweet in the early morning of December 19th? Do you remember, I believe Ms. Powell was there and others were at the White House discussing with Mr. Trump? Smith, I remember there was a meeting with Sidney Powell where there was a discussion about whether she would be appointing a sort of special counsel for this role that would assist Trump in pushing these election claims of election fraud that were false. My recollection of that is the meeting ended, I believe, with Mr. Trump saying, I want her in that position. But then it didn't happen because she didn't fill out the paperwork, clearance paperwork necessary for that. Question. Who introduced the idea of Mr. Clark becoming Attorney General? Jack Smith. Our investigation determined that Congressman Perry had a role in getting Jeffrey Clark on the radar of President Trump as someone who could help him and getting meetings with Jeffrey Clark and the president. Did your request of the toll records of certain congressional members, did that relate to phone calls made to these members of Congress on or around January 6th? Smith, yes. Question, so in your prosecutorial experience, do you generally seek to obtain call records from both individuals involved in a phone call or message? Smith, we do. And in this case, with the records for that evening, it was particularly important because we interviewed Boris Epstein. One of the things that came out was that Rudy Giuliani had two phones and that Boris Epstein had another phone. And we needed to make sure that we weren't missing any calls in terms of where the calls came from. So it would corroborate the records that we had, but also make sure that there's calls that we missed. Question, can you explain for us on the record what information generally is included in a toll records request? Smith, sure. Again, my understanding from a prosecutor's perspective is it is non-content information. It is generally about when the call started, when the call stopped. That would include, obviously, the duration of the call and who the call is to and who the call is from. That's a basic information that you want to get from toll record subpoenas. Question, how would you, in your experience, have used this type of evidence in a trial? Smith, it would have been relevant in a number of ways. So it would have been relevant, you could put it together in a summary chart to show a series of contacts. And it could be relevant to show the campaign that evening to reach out to senators to delay the proceedings. It could be relevant to show, for example, on the afternoon of January 6th, of notice, that there was notice that violence was going on. Congressmen, both Republican and Democrat, and the vice president were in danger. That text records would make that incontrovertible that those calls actually happened. It'd also be relevant for examining witnesses, whether it would be a prosecution witness who might not remember exactly when a call happened, or a defense witness. For example, if any of the co-conspirators were to testify, which, as I mentioned before, was something we would have welcomed, we would have had toll records to question them about calls they had made, the calls that they received, things of that nature, which, in my experience, is very effective. When you were requesting toll records, when you were requesting toll records, did it mean that DOJ or FBI was conducting surveillance on members of Congress? Smith, no. When you were collecting toll records, did it mean that DOJ or FBI would be able to wiretap phone calls made by members of Congress? Smith, no. So with that, we come to the end of the 8th episode of excerpts from Jack Smith's deposition. Please remember to share, like, and subscribe, and I will come back with the next few episodes. I thought it was going to be 10, but I, in George W. Bush's words, misunderestimated, and so it's going to be longer. And I've made a podcast where all of these videos are on my channel if you're interested in going through them chronologically. With that said, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.